Muy buenas tardes y gracias por seguir con nosotros. Esto es Tijuana Innovadora 2012, la frontera inteligente rumbo a la grandeza. Damos la bienvenida a quienes se incorporan en este momento a las actividades de esta tarde que está dedicada al tema de ciudad digital. Agradecemos por supuesto al gestor de los invitados de este bloque, un gran colaborador de Tijuana Innovadora, Enrique Jiménez Ejival, para quien pido un fuerte aplauso. Una ciudad innovadora debe incorporar a su sistema urbano formas de comunicación muy avanzadas. Es por eso que Tijuana está en proceso de convertirse en una ciudad digital. En este camino rumbo al futuro se han trazado metas a corto y mediano plazo que eventualmente culminen en el sueño de poner la más alta tecnología de comunicación al servicio de nuestra comunidad. Para configurar una ciudad digital debe cumplirse con una serie de etapas de gran complejidad y para dar seguimiento a este proyecto, Tijuana Innovadora cuenta con un comité especializado que puntualmente atiende estos procedimientos y certificaciones necesarias para avanzar con pasos firmes hacia una modernización que repercuta en la vida cotidiana de los residentes fronterizos. Y para conocer más sobre la importancia de las ciudades digitales, presentamos nuestra primera conferencia magistral de esta tarde. Tijuana en el camino a una ciudad sensible y digital, a cargo del señor Carlo Ratti, director de SENSEable City Lab del MIT. Carlo Ratti es un prestigiado ingeniero civil y arquitecto de origen italiano que da clases en el Instituto de Tecnología de Massachusetts, el MIT. Es autor de más de 100 publicaciones entre artículos para revistas, periódicos y libros especializados en arquitectura. Aprovecha la dinámica urbana, la mezcla con tecnología para obtener resultados que ayuden a tomar mejores decisiones como ciudades, siempre con una estética vanguardista. Ha sido premiado como el mejor innovador en residencias y por la revista Time recibió el galardón a la mejor invención del año 2007, entre otros muchos premios. Así que recibamos con un fuerte aplauso a nuestro distinguido personaje, Carlo Ratti.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be back here in Tijuana. Now, what I will do today is actually share with you some of the work we're doing at MIT, at the SENSEable City Lab, the group we have in Boston and in Singapore. And I think, at the end, actually, in the questions and answers, we can then talk more about Tijuana, about what is happening here, about digital cities. And I would just want to start by saying that we don't like very much the name smart cities. But actually, we think SENSEable City gives more the idea of a city that responds to people, to citizens. And so that's the name of our group in Boston. And I just want to share with you some pictures of what we do and what is the idea behind our lab. Now, if you start with this picture, if you take this car, something quite interesting happened in Formula One over the past 10, 15 years. 10, 15 years ago, if you had a Formula One, if you wanted to win a Formula One race, you need a good car and a good driver. You needed physical things. Today, if you want to win a Formula One race, actually you also need a system like this. A system made of thousands and thousands of sensors onto the car, collecting information in real time, sending it to those computers, where data is analyzed, is processed, and decisions are made in real time. In other terms, that's what, as engineers, we would call a real-time control system, which is basically a system made of two components, a sensing component and an actuating component. And sensing and actuating is really what we do every day, what every living or dynamic system does. When we meet each other, we sense each other, we shake hands, we collect information from each other, and then we respond to that information, we actuate. So sensing and actuating. Now, the amazing thing we believe, and that is what is behind this idea of smart cities, or as we say, SENSEable cities, is that our cities are starting to behave like real-time control systems. Our cities are starting to behave a little bit like the Formula One racing cars. They've been layered, covered, with many different types of digital information, with networks. Think about the cell phone network. Think about all the sensors that we have in our environment. And because of that, then the way we can collect information from our cities and respond to that is radically changed. Let me just make one example. Think about the cell phone network. Now, it's still quite striking today to think that it didn't exist just 30 years ago. That's not a very long time. The first one is 1980s, 1979, in Japan by NTT. And then it took a long time to get to 1 billion connections, and then look at how it has been growing over the past few years. Well, you might say there are 7 billion people on the planet. How much more can it grow? If you look at predictions by Ericsson, actually they think it will be like this in just a few years. It will be like 50 billion connections. And the reason for that is not that each of us will have 10 cell phones in our pockets, but the reason is that we started connecting people to people, and then more and more people to data, as you see here, people to data to machine, and it's increasingly machine to machine, so things talking to other things, which is almost as if every atom out there in the physical world were becoming both a sensor and an actuator. Now, you might say, all of this is fine, but where is all of this leading us? What are the consequences of this, then, when we look at it in a more philosophical way? And we think they're quite interesting. And I wanted actually to show here a slide from Paola Antonelli. Paola is actually here. She just arrived today, and she will speak on Sunday, I believe. And she did a show at MoMA, at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, called Talk to Me. The idea was that because of all these technologies, our things are starting to talk back to us. And you know, it's nothing else than an old dream of architecture, an old dream of art, architecture, and planning. It's the dream of Michelangelo. When he sculpted the Mose, as you see here, he took a hammer, he threw it at the Mose. There's still a little chip on the knee, and he shouted, "Perché non parli?" Why don't you speak? And today, because of this technology, for the first time, actually our things, our objects, our homes, our cities, our buildings are starting to speak back to us and interact with us in a different way. Well, having said it, I wanted to share with you some examples of what we do, the projects we're working on, both divided into the sensing component, collecting information, and the actuating component. Now, on the sensing, I wanted to start with this project. It looks at this computer. Now, if you take this computer, you know everything about it. Every chip, it can be traced. You see it here. You know where it was produced, how it moved on the planet, how it became this machine. However, a few years from now, when you throw away that computer, you know very little about it. Sometimes that's how it ends up. From the United States, a lot of illegal e-waste is shipped to Asia, from Europe to Africa. And then you know very little. Today, we know where our objects come from. We don't know where they go. And so what we decided to do was what if we could actually design a little chip, like you see here? We couldn't find anything off the shelf. We worked with Qualcomm to actually design it and program it, and a little chip that will tell us where trash is going. So then this was the first deployment. We put the tags onto different type of objects. If we can have a bit of sound, there should be a bit of sound with the video. And so this is 3,000 different types of objects with 500 volunteers. The first deployment was in Seattle. Every possible thing. And then after tagging this, we started tracking it. So here you see the day of deployment in Seattle. Then you see after a few days, you see the main landfills next to Seattle. So a lot of stuff actually ends up there. But then a big surprise, actually, a lot of objects started traveling very, very far. And that was a surprise because today everybody knows a small piece of the chain. But this was actually one of the first times that the whole chain was being traced. And you see sometimes in crazy ways. Look at the trace that went from Seattle all the way to Chicago and then to Baja California, to a plant where there's actually e-waste being treated. And still move after 1 month and 2 months. So, what can you learn from a project like this? Well, the first thing that you can learn is actually that if you're an engineer, you can get all of this information, and then you can think about designing a better, more efficient system. And if you look at those traces, you can see that a lot of them didn't make much sense. You could actually make them much more efficient just by optimizing the system. Now, the other thing that we thought was quite important is how people can use this information and actually change their behavior, how we can all change our behavior. And one of the most telling things in this project was at the end of the project, somebody came to us and said, I used to drink water in plastic bottles every day and put them outside my door and think they would disappear. But now I actually know that's not the case. They don't disappear, they go a few miles from home and they will stay there forever in a landfill. And because of that, I actually changed my behavior and stopped drinking water in plastic bottles. The third thing we discovered was actually accidental, unplanned, happened more recently. And that happened when, completely unexpected, a burglar came to our lab at MIT and actually stole a lot of stuff, including some of the tags in the computers that tell you where they go. And here is what happened. Thank you. Thank you. Well, this was an example of sensing, how today we can sense our environment in a different way through all of these technologies and networks and ways to collect information. Now, there's another type of sensing that we think is very exciting today, and it's actually all that information that we all capture every day, and then we upload online. It can be on Flickr, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, you name it, and actually how that can tell us a lot about how our cities work and what happens in our environment. Actually in the lab, we were one of the first groups to look at some of these databases. What you see here, for instance, is data from Flickr. It's pictures that we all take, and actually a lot of these pictures go online in places like Flickr, and then you can start mining them and look at interesting things. Like in this case, you see Florence. We were working with the city and the government there. So you see actually all of Tuscany to the left, and you see where people take pictures there. And then you can zoom into Florence and see where actually the most, even at the Duomo, at one of the central places there, and look at where actually people tend to go and take pictures. Now, if you want to be more sophisticated, what you can do is look at the picture and look at the header, and then look at the time it was taken. And then if you do that, you can then create trajectories. You know that the same user has been uploaded and made public pictures taken here, here, and here at different times, and then you can get trajectories like this. So what you see here is actually Italians and Americans as they move through Tuscany and take pictures. Now, I got a question for you. So where are the Americans? To the left or to the right? Now, if you think Americans are to the left, raise your hands. Americans to the left, you need to make up your mind. Americans to the left? Okay. Americans to the right? Okay. Well, actually, Americans are to the left. So the first group was right. And you can see that because, if you come from the United States, if you go to Italy, and you might go once every 10 years or once in a lifetime, then the places where you will go are the key places: Genoa, Pisa, Florence, Siena, Perugia. But actually, if you're Italian, you've been there many, many times, and what you do is look at how different is the way of moving in the country, looking at little hidden places. That little island called Elba, beautiful little island with a lot of Italians, but almost no Americans seem to go there. And really a different way of using space. Well, you can do the other things. This is something our students were very excited about, looking at pictures and see where's the best place to go partying in Barcelona. So you can see all the pictures being taken in the city, and actually what's happening there, and then the best places where people are having parties and fun. they even managed to do a paper and look at this correlation between Britons and parties in the city, in Barcelona. Actually, it turns out to be very, very high. And you can actually do other things. You can look at the pictures and look at the color of the pictures, and then you can, in a certain sense, monitor drought as it happens through Spain. You know, very important thing in the country. And during the summer, it gets very dry. So as the country changes color, you can look at that, and instead of monitoring in the traditional way, using sensors in the countryside, you can do it through the eyes of all of us. That's why we call the project the world's eyes, los ojos del mundo, really to use this information to better understand what's happening, thanks to what we all collect every day. Now, if you then imagine taking what we saw before, taking what we saw here, taking information from networks, from many, many other type of digital systems, then you get to almost creating like a real-time internet, a real-time web. And that's what we are working on in Singapore. You see it here. So imagine a living city where you know in real time all what's happening around yourself. So there can be information using data from networks. That's what you see here. It's about energy consumption and temperature. Actually, the two are related in Singapore. When it gets too hot, then you turn on the air conditioning. How the city changes during special events. You see it here with the Formula 1 Grand Prix, and how everybody moves there. Or how the city expands and shrinks based on traffic. Because of traffic jams, see how it becomes bigger. Almost we're becoming bigger because it takes you longer to get there. It's an isochronic map, how long it takes to go there. And then also the global flows. So the local and the global flows and how they intersect. So all the containers coming into Singapore, going out to Singapore, all the people coming into Singapore and going out to Singapore. So these were some examples of collecting information, the sensing, as we saw before. But you know, as in the Formula 1 racing, the goal is then to win the race. The goal is really actuating. It's how do you respond to this information? How do you take action? And so that's what I want to focus now in the second part of the presentation about how we can really use this in order to change the city in different ways, in physical and digital ways, using the data to do that. The first thing you need to do is, with all this, you can do with all this information, is actually start analyzing it and use it to better understand what is going on in our cities or in our regions. In this project, for instance, we did in the UK, we built the largest ever social network using data, non-internet social network, using data from telecommunication networks. And then we use it in order to understand communities over space and actually how people organize in regions. So, you know, that's how you could phrase it in a mathematical way. If you've got a geographical region and a measure of the strength between people, how can you partition it? And here's a little video that tells it to you in more detail. So every time you got a telephone calls, you build a link between two places. And then if you add all these calls for the whole country, you get something you could call the human network. And then what if you could use the human network to really understand communities, for instance, regions. And that's what's happening here. And the amazing thing is that some regions are actually very similar to the existing ones, but some of them are quite different. It's a geography that's not based on history, on politics, on other things, but it's really based on us, on how we all communicate with each other. So, and this is what we did in the UK. Then this is more recent. We just did it in the US. You see that's from the New York Times. You see how states actually in the US sometimes combine, sometimes they split, really based on the intensity of communication. In this case, it's communication data from AT&T and how communities are shaped over space and how they actually help build our countries and the way we communicate with each other. So that's about how all this information, this incredible amount of information, if you take all the data produced by humanity from the beginning till 2003, well, that's the same amount that we produced between yesterday and today, more or less. So this incredible wealth of data, how we can use it and analyze it to better understand what is going on around ourselves. The other important thing, as we started mentioning before, is actually how this can also help us change behavior. And in this project, we're working with SNCF, the French railway company. And we started from this point. If you look at this, you see a map of Paris, and it shows you how big, in a certain sense, is Paris, how long it takes you to go to different parts of Paris if you're moving by bicycle, by metro, or by car. But if tomorrow you had a different type of budget, not based on time, but say based on CO2 emissions, then this is how the map will look if you move by bicycle, by metro, or by car. So the idea was, is there any way we can actually make this information evident? Is there any way we can give this information about travel behavior to people, to all of us, and then this could promote perhaps behavioral change? And CO2 being emitted because of transportation is 1/3 of the global CO2 being emitted. So if we can make a change there, it can be a big deal. Now, how can we do it, however, with no user input? Because if you go today online, you can actually find many websites where you say, today I've been doing that many miles by foot, by car, by bike, by plane, and then you get your total CO2 emissions for the day. But, but people will do it for a little while, but then often, lose interest. It takes quite a lot of effort to do it regularly every day. So how can we do it with no user input? And, well, then we thought, what has been happening over the past few years is that all of us have been slowly changing and becoming almost like walking sensors. We carry a lot of things in our pockets. If you think about a smartphone, it has an accelerometer, it has a GPS, it has many other sensors that detect what's going on. And so look, for instance, at how your smartphone sees you from your pocket when you're moving in different ways. So this is the signature that your smartphone collects, your accelerometer collects, when you're actually moving by bike, by bus, by walking, when you're biking, when you're in the metro. And so actually what we've been doing is this app, that's not public yet, but will be soon, where you collect all this information, and automatically you can get a map of where you've been during the day, your mode of transportation, how many calories you burn, how much CO2 you have emitted, and then, that can be useful information that you can, if you want, use to promote, to change your behavior, so to promote behavioral change. Now, at the same time, and I'm going from the smart city really spans everything from the level of data, the individual level, to big, larger urban projects. So I'm going from the smaller projects to the bigger ones. And here, we're entering the space of design and architecture. And design and architecture is really the way that traditionally we've been doing actuation, getting information, understanding what's going on, and using design in order to change and transform our environment. So in this project, for instance, we've been working, this was presented at the Milan Design Week this year, and it was with one of the main worldwide appliance manufacturers who, from next year, will actually have a chip in every appliance. Think a refrigerator, a washing machine, any appliance, a chip to put it online, to allow that appliance to be on the internet. And so the question was, to us was, what can you do at that point that changes your interaction with it? When you collect all of this information from anything from your kitchen, and how can that change the way you actually do things with, you cook or you do things in your home? And so here our idea was the first one. Well, the first interesting thing is that today, if you buy an iPhone, you don't look at the manual. Anybody from 5 years to 90 years old can actually very easily learn how to use it in just a few minutes. But if you buy a washing machine, it's one of those things where you still need to look at a big operating manual to understand how it works. The same with an oven. If you want to know, if you have a sophisticated oven that has many different type of curves for cooking different things with different temperatures over time, then you need to spend time learning how to use it. So the first thing was, what if you can actually bring all this information in a very seamless way close to the user, so that you don't need any manual. You can just very easily start using it, and everything is online, so you got the information. And then how really this can change the way you can cook. In this case, for the first time, they were able to develop an induction plate that changes dynamically. So it means that if you got a plate, a plane, a top, and then you put something to cook here, and then you can just heat it wherever you put it. So wherever you put it, you can just heat it dynamically wherever you put a pot. And then if you do that, then it's easy. You can cook anywhere. You can actually use a scale there. You can wait. And you can easily interact also with information. The problem we usually have today that you're working and cooking in the kitchen, but maybe your recipe is in the living room on your computer, and you go back and forth between one and the other. Can you actually combine all of that and make this seamless cooking experience there? So here is a quick video that shows the pavilion we developed. All right, and moving on still at a larger scale, we said architecture is really the way we've always been using, we've always been actuating the city. So this is a project we actually did in Zaragoza in Spain for the World Expo. That was just before Shanghai in 2008. And the mayor of Zaragoza came to us with a very precise question. Water has been a beautiful ingredient of architecture and planning for thousands of years. We've been using our square, in our streets, in our courtyards. Think about Mexico, think about Spain, think about Southern Europe. Now, how could we actually use today water in a different way, thanks to technology? And one of the ideas that was developed at MIT was, imagine you have a pipe, as you see here, and on this pipe you got many solenoid valves opening and closing very fast, controlled by a computer. Then you can almost control water by the drop. And you can use the drop to write in the air, to actually show images, text, patterns, almost to do this kind of magic water wall that you approach and opens up to let you through, as you see here in the image. Well, the mayor liked the idea, Mayor Belloc liked the idea, so we got a commission to design the pavilion at the entrance of the expo, called Digital Water Pavilion. The whole pavilion is made of water. You can write on it, you can show images, text, patterns. No doors or windows, but when you approach it, it opens up to let you in. And then when you're inside, actually all of the walls expand and shrink based on people. So if you've got more people, you can make the space bigger or smaller. And then the roof is also covered with a thin layer of water. If you got too much wind, you can actually lower it to minimize splashing. Or at the end of the day, you can close the building and the whole architecture disappears. Hopefully without anybody underneath it. We have sensors for that as well. So, well, this was before the opening. This guy, if you look at his face, he was very, very puzzled about what was happening. This was actually projections in the water. So the pixels made of water and the projected pixels on the top of it. This was myself trying not to get wet. And I should tell you now what happened one night when all of the sensors that detect people when they approach the building stopped working. And you know, that night we were terrified because all of the sensors are connected to a computer. The computer crashed, so the building kept on doing its own crazy things, cuts and holes and text and writing, but without responding to people anymore. But actually, that night was one of the most fun nights. That one night, thousands and thousands of kids from all of Zaragoza came to the building, to the pavilion, to play a different game. Not anymore a building that opens up to let you in, but a building where you need to play like this. And for us, it was important because as architects, as engineers, we always think that we know how people will use the stuff we design. But then reality, especially when you design more interactive things, reality is always a surprise, especially human reality. In this case, it was a good surprise. Now, you can really see how this kind of cities becoming filled with sensors and ways to collect information and feedback loops with sensing and actuate. It can really span many scales, all the way from the small scale, the scale of the kitchen, the pavilion, or the scale of the whole city. And they all are kind of connected. You know, the Bauhaus in the past century used to say you have to design from the spoon to the city. You could almost think about all scales, from the microchip to the global, the planet scale. And actually, what I will not show today, but maybe we can discuss it in the questions and answers, is a project we are doing here in Mexico, where Tijuana was involved at the beginning. That's how actually these technologies can be used to take a chunk of the city and create in this case, a ciudad creativa digital, a digital creative city, so a piece of a smart city that can be like a catalyst for the larger city. But I think we should leave that to the questions and answers. And what I would like to take the last few minutes I have to actually share with you one project in more detail, because we believe that something very interesting is happening today in design. Things are changing very rapidly, and the way we used to design things before is changing. Before, cities were made of concrete and steel and bricks and mortar, and we knew how to make them. But cities of tomorrow, made of concrete and silicon, we still don't know exactly how to build them. And we really need people from many disciplines, from architecture and design, yes, but also from engineering, from physics, from mathematics, or social sciences, all together try to work in this new emerging field. And here then I want to share with you one project a bit more in detail. This project also started with a question by a mayor, in this case the mayor of Copenhagen in Denmark, and she came to us saying, how can all of these ubiquitous computing help us with traffic and transportation? Now, the amazing thing is that if you think about transportation in Copenhagen, this is what it looks like. Copenhagen is a city where a few decades ago there were quite a lot of cars in the city center, but it's a city where today actually have a lot of bikes. It's a city where 30 to 50% of all trips every day actually happen by bicycle. So we started thinking about bicycle, and we came up with the following idea.
Welcome to the Copenhagen Wheel, the wheel that turns your ordinary bike into a smart electric hybrid. Quickly and easily, with no additional batteries or wires. The Copenhagen Wheel allows you to capture the energy dissipated while braking and cycling, and save it for when you need a bit of a boost. Controlled through your smartphone, the Copenhagen Wheel becomes a natural extension of your everyday life. The Copenhagen Wheel is your personal trainer, sensing your effort level and providing you with real-time feedback about your fitness and exercise goals. The Copenhagen Wheel also enhances your experience of the city. It connects you with things a cyclist wants to know: upcoming traffic congestion, road conditions, and pollution levels. Choose to keep your data or share it with your friends and other cyclists through social networks like Facebook. As you ride, you also collect green miles. It's similar to a frequent flyer program, but good for the environment. Elegant, responsive, smart. A new mode of transport for a rapidly changing world. So turn on your life and turn on the city. The Copenhagen Wheel.
And what I then want to do with you is share with you how the project evolved from this initial concept. So you see here, at the beginning, we started working with the city and with the mayor, and several ideas came up, including, as you see here, one idea that was this kind of funny wheel, that at the beginning was almost nothing, was just an idea of a wheel that would get your energy when you brake, and then perhaps give it back to you. But it was not technical. There was nothing there yet of how this could be achieved. But like many times, when you got an idea, you don't know if it works or not, then the best thing you can do is just, let's try it out. So what you see here is finishing the student workshop. We did a few sketches, combining, putting together the batteries and motor, packing everything together. And then, here is the first version. It was working, presented it to the mayor in Copenhagen. That's the main square in Copenhagen. She liked it. So then, Ben, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's see if we can really make this happen. So going back to the drawing board meant let's rethink exactly what we want to do, so defining better our objectives. And then, again, redesigning everything, putting different pieces together, choosing the motor, the different components inside, packing everything together. And then, how to connect this kind of hub with the motor and the batteries with the rest. So, casing and spoking. Now, this was the initial idea. Looked pretty bad, as you can see. Then we had something that looked better, but actually wasn't working. If you look at this, it looks better, but when you apply a torque at the center, this doesn't connect with the rim outside. The torque is not transmitted easily to the rim outside. So then we came up with the following idea that was, imagine those spokes that start from the rim, simply touch the hub without being connected in tension, and then go back to the rim. So basically, you just have a V-shaped spoke that in tension fix the hub. And here, some people in the group thought it would work. Some people thought it wouldn't work. Again, if in doubt, let's try it out. So we actually prototype a small wheel. You see it here. Today it's very easy. You got printers. This is done with a printer that does 3D. They're getting very, very common in our architecture and design schools. So you send the file, and then you get the full 3D model. And then, adding the spokes to that, he was very skeptical, as you can see, that this would work. But actually, this in the end was working. So that became the way the spoking was made. And then there was all the controls. So that's when other people got involved, not only designers and mechanical engineers, but also programmers and human-computer interaction people. So you see designing how the interaction with the bike will be, programming the phones to control it. And as you saw in the video, we also have our bikes a bit smarter, being able to collect information from our environment. And today, people use bikes in order to get data, in order to measure air quality. There's a project that looks like this. But actually, we thought this is not what we should have done. So we took some existing sensors, very, very small, and actually put them into the wheels. And the amazing thing is that if you do this and measure CO, NOx, noise level, and other type of environmental parameters, then just with a few bicycles, as you see here, you can cover a whole city. And that's quite interesting, because the way we monitor air quality in cities today usually is with a few stations, and then, getting some average values. But that tells you very little about the exposure of somebody, or like a cyclist on the road. That also has other issues. You might recall that the previous mayor of Madrid was saying that air quality was getting better and better in the city, till when people discovered that actually he was just taking the measuring stations and moving them more and more inside the parks. And when you do this, you actually get data from just a few bicycles. You can cover the whole city, as you see here, and you can get really the exposure to pollutants from each of us. So this idea of sensing much closer to people. Well, having put everything together, then we had to assemble a few prototypes to be taken in Copenhagen, where they were going to be presented at a big conference. You see the different pieces being made, programming the microprocessors inside, and then, shipping everything to Copenhagen, and then testing it there. Here is the mayor trying the bike. And you see now in the video the mayor of Copenhagen, the mayor of Toronto for the first time trying the first prototypes.
I will follow. I said, run away, run away, run away. Oh, I felt it. Excellent. This bike is fantastic. It's incredible. It takes no effort. You see my bike? You start pedaling and the motor takes over. And then it will tell you the air quality, temperature. Incredible cars. It's amazing to see an idea come to fruition like that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Well, in the last few minutes, just a few things I wanted to share with you about how really this is changing the way we design things. And, we used to think about knowledge as something a bit like this. We used to think about knowledge as something where you could put everything in the right spot. It was still the old idea from the Middle Ages of St. Thomas, when he wrote the Summa, of being able to put everything, all piece of global knowledge in the right spot. But today we know that that's not the case anymore. Today we know that actually maybe if we had to draw a map of knowledge, maybe it would look more like this. That's a beautiful map that was on the cover of Science magazine that was built by taking 800,000 papers and looking at all the links between them. And when you do that, you see everything is linked with everything else. You see these beautiful connections between brain research and computer science and mathematics. So really something that looks almost like a map of the internet, where those boundaries, those artificial boundaries between disciplines do not appear anymore. And the other interesting thing is that this is an article from Nature, another scientific magazine, that looked at the most important papers in the past and today. Now, in the past, the most important paper usually were one author from one discipline. There was still the idea that you could be like Newton, sitting under a tree, getting an apple on your head, and then thinking about a great idea about gravitation, writing about it, and that would be an important paper. Now, the importance of papers you can measure with what is called the impact factor. It's a little bit like likes on Facebook. How many people will actually cite or like your paper? Now, today, the most important ones, the highest impact factor, are usually done from many people in different disciplines. So the idea, we really need to work collaboratively. And we think that the same thing is happening now in design. It's starting to happen in design. If you look at this picture, that is Le Corbusier presenting his plan voisin for Paris in the past century, his ideas for the city of Paris. And the idea was quite simple. It was actually demolish the whole city, just keep Notre Dame and a few other things, and replace everything with those new modernist towers that you see there. And actually, if you look at this picture, that's the hand of Le Corbusier, the hand of the architect, but it could almost be like the hand of God, from the top down, presenting his design and giving it to the people. And people even said at the time that you couldn't design collaboratively. There was a saying that when a camel is a horse designed by a committee. So, if you put a committee in charge, then they will not come up with a beautiful horse, but with a camel. Well, we think that now that is changing. Actually, this is an editorial from a recent issue by Domus, the design magazine, the whole issue was about open source architecture and how actually we can use learn from open source culture and apply that to design. The interesting thing in this case, actually, we had to write an editorial. I initially was asked about writing an editorial for the issue, but said, well, you know, if it is about open source architecture, let's do it collaboratively as well, the editorial to this. So this was done on Wikipedia with a number of other people, including Paola, again, who will be here later this week, Nicolas Negroponte, with Jonah Bracken, with Hans-Ulrich Obrist, and many, many others. And, you know, then that became the beginning of this editorial, and it became the way to actually create something that would continue to evolve online. And, you know, almost when they publish an editorial, they want the picture of who wrote it. And we say, what should we put there? And then in the end, we decided, well, maybe we should put a picture that combines all of us. And what I wanted to finish with is really that I think that when we think about this new field of smart cities, of intelligent cities, when you think about how design is changing, our wish is that the design in the future will look a bit less like the image of Le Corbusier from the top down, presenting his design to demolish all of Paris, and a little more like this, like an architect designer that really combines all of us. Thank you. And so I think we have still a few minutes. This was on time as a presentation. So I don't know how we should do with questions, but if there's any comments or questions or... Any hands? If not, we can continue. We can do it more informally later. Yeah? Do we have a microphone?
Question over
Actually,
here.
there's microphones there to the left.
Question over
and
here.
to the right. Yeah, one there.
I've seen you once or twice here in Tijuana, so I know you have contact with people and architects and there's a big movement regarding cycling in Tijuana. There's a city of 2 million people, and there's not one official bike lane. There's no bike paths. There's no racks in shopping centers. There's probably no rack here at Secut today. And we would like to see, you help us bring that culture here through the people you know. There's bike rides now every day. People are learning how to ride a bike on the street, and drivers are learning how to drive with bicyclists.
Well, first of all, let me say I'll be... First of all, let me say, I'd be delighted to help, but I think the clapping for your idea, I think shows that it probably would be very successful on its own. And think about, what happened in a city like New York. How many people would have bet that New York would have been transferred so much by bicycles over the past few years? By bicycles and also making pedestrians big parts of the city. And these things happen because of a number of things. It has to be cool cycling. And then you got like a tipping point. More people cycle, and you go biking paths, and then it becomes something that everybody does, like in Copenhagen. And those things are very subtle. Over the past 10 years, 20 years, we saw a city like Beijing, where everybody was cycling, where now everybody's going by car, and it has some of the most crucial, the most terrible issues with traffic and pollution in the world. And other cities like Copenhagen itself, or Paris, or New York, and many others doing the opposite. Not completely, but actually really embracing cycling. You got more and more people cycling. So I think this thing can happen, and I'm sure that if this can happen in Copenhagen, that doesn't have the beautiful climate of Tijuana, I'm sure it can be a great success here.
Good afternoon. Why all of these amazing things took so long to be here? It was the knowledge, or maybe the money for. Why took so long?
It's so long where
to be development all of these technologies?
Well, first of all, I think there's different types of technologies, and some of them require more investment, some of them require less investment. But I think actually the progress is very, very fast. And sometimes sometimes there's mayors who come to us and say, how should my city as a smart city look like? And I say, you know, well, a good example is Cairo. And they look at me and say, Cairo? I mean, what are you talking about? But actually, if you think about Cairo, if you think about the Arab Spring, for instance, is a great example of how these technologies that didn't exist just a few years ago, have been able to promote incredible change by allowing people to organize in real time. It's the same sensing and actuating we discussed before. And you know, so what I want to say here is that, you know, some of these dynamics first are very fast, and sometimes they happen where you wouldn't expect it at an unprecedented speed. So there's many, you know, when you talk about smart cities, there's many different things. Yes, for some of them, you need more infrastructure, but there's great things you can do just by allowing all of us to connect in new ways, thanks to the new network technology we didn't have just a few years ago.
Hey, hello, good afternoon. My question is based on the way maybe people will adapt to technology. With like the new adaptations, like in cities, like the example of the bicycle, the example of the kitchen, design and architecture, those are very big changes. So what I imagine, what I ask myself is, how have you seen that people react to these big changes?
It's another great question. You know, at MIT, we still have in the basement of one of the buildings, one of those big mainframe computers of of the past century. And if you wanted to learn how to use that computer, you know, you needed at least a year of studying just to learn how to use it, how to interface with the technology. Now, the amazing thing today, we said before, is that anybody takes an iPhone, and an iPhone actually has each of us in our pockets. If we got a smartphone, we got more or less the same computing power that all of MIT had at the time of putting a man onto the moon. Now, but then it's something that we can use and learn to use in just a few minutes. And actually, something we are very happy about is that the Digital Water Pavilion in Zaragoza has the same seamless ability, where actually people don't need to look at the manual, they just, you know, go there, play with it, and understand how it works. And it goes back to this idea of Michelangelo of why don't you speak, of perché non parli? That is about, this is not about technology. This is about people. This is that technology is only a mean in order to change and make seamless and easier our interaction with things. So, you know, from this point of view, I think we should really focus about that component, the human component, and not about the technology. And technology, if it is well done, it should disappear.
I just have one more quick question. This is based on the first one, but it's like a complement to the first one. On the new changes done by technology, like one that actually the last part where we saw about the design of the city, well, I bet that design for a city, and nowadays, that's a very big change. And well, also cities, they have a lot of technology. How have you seen that people's concept of beauty has changed? The example maybe of good design, good architecture, and more of a good example of beauty. Would you say that this has evolved from maybe a few centuries ago?
That's also an important point. Probably there's I would reply very quickly, but it's a longer question. But also the way, not only the way of designing is changing. And actually, if you look at the open source architecture website on Wikipedia site, at the page on Wikipedia, you see the different phases where we try to explore how things are changing, not only the way we design, we discuss a brief, but also the way we can build and so on. And in building, there's a big changes happening. That's what the economists just called a few weeks ago the kind of third industrial revolution. All of this digital fabrication and how we can use things like the 3D printers you saw before to actually fabricate things in a new way, and that's applying to objects and more to homes and buildings. So it's a longer question, but I think, yes, this is changing also very much. Maybe this side, and then we...
Thank you. My name is Gabriela Dow from Startup Circle in San Diego. And your comments about crowd knowledge brought to mind a discussion that was had a few months ago at a Gov2O conference, so I'd love to get your take on it. And the discussion was, and you mentioned the mayors, which I really appreciated, do we still need elected officials, or do we elect them in the same way when we could, for example, just have people vote on the way that they would like certain issues handled, have the elected officials say how they're going to handle those issues in a computer system and have the system pick who truly is going to be the best representative. And the discussion that was had was half of the group thought that would be a better way to pick our elected officials, and the other half said, no, you still need that person with their morals, their conviction, their personality to be the true leader of a city or of a society. And I'd like your thoughts on that.
Thanks. That's also a very important point. And I say, again, it's a long answer, but what I would say is that things are not always that simple. And so it's not as easy as, just combining and polling instantly people. There's other dynamics, and there's not only just bottom-up. There's actually bottom-up and top-down. You see it even if you think about Wikipedia. Yes, everybody can change something, but you got editors. Editors that actually do top-down decisions and actually decide what should go and shouldn't go, and people who have more skills and more training, and then they have different type of responsibility. So I would say what we are seeing is that we can, yes, bring new forces up in a bottom-up way, and we can leverage them for many things, for building, for design, and so on. But it doesn't mean that we need to do everything in that way. It's a much more complex system with top-down and bottom-up and the intersection between them.
Excellent, thank you.
Should we...
Se nos termina el tiempo. Está con nosotros el señor José Galicot Béjar, presidente de Tijuana Innovadora AC, y también está con nosotros el señor Jack Wiener, que por cierto, dicho sea de paso, es el creador de este reconocimiento que se ha estado entregando a los participantes, y no solamente eso, también de la escultura que está aquí afuera del Centro Cultural Tijuana, en la nueva fuente. Señor Jack Wiener.
I know that you understand perfectly Spanish, so I will talk in Spanish. Is that right?
Okay.
Ok, amigos, hemos oído a uno de los genios más brillantes que hay en este momento en el diseño de cosas para ciudades. Carlo Ratti, si solo todo lo que hemos hecho de esfuerzo hubiera sido para que ustedes escucharan a Carlo, estábamos pagados. Han escuchado de veras a alguien que, bueno, pues que no es fácil conseguir y traer, y Tijuana Innovadora ha hecho un esfuerzo muy grande para traerlo y que ustedes lo escuchen. Muy buenas preguntas, gente que pregunta. Lo único que les voy a pedir de amigo que pregunten rápido, porque se echan discursitos, sí. Okay, Carlo, we have been very happy to have you. This is a design that...
Muchísimas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Se dan unas descontroladas con esto, más cuando le agarro la mano, ¿verdad? Okay. ¿Qué pasó? Ok, a la 1. Me van a ayudar, ¿no? A las 2 y a las 3. Tenemos 2 días y medio, aprovechenlo. Tenemos un mundo de talento por llegar todavía, y tal como Carlo, cada uno de ellos no vamos a tener oportunidad de tenerlos otra vez. Ha sido un placer oírlo. You're a magnificent presentator, and thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a todos.
It was such a pleasure to see you back again.
Yeah, it's great to be back.